Thank you so much for joining this session focused on best practices in virtual advising. Most certainly, with the coronavirus pandemic, we are in unprecedented times. Students are learning in new and different ways. By now, all school districts across the state have started in either a remote posture, in-person posture, or a hybrid of the two in some way, shape, or form. In the vast majority of school districts across Tennessee, there's some contingency of students who have chosen to learn virtually this year. That fact really does provide a unique set of circumstances and some challenges as it relates to college advising in this school year with this group of seniors. Last year, when the pandemic hit in March, most of those students had done the Tennessee Promise application, they had submitted FAFSAs, they'd done college applications, many of them. So they were already in the pipeline. With this fresh group of seniors, we are collectively going to have to find new and unique and different ways to serve those students to help get them into the college access pipeline this year and help and advise them and maintain and build rapport with them to help guide them through this senior year into their freshman year of college. So this session is going to be comprised of a panel of 3 individuals who will be introducing themselves during the actual panel discussion. They're all experts in the field, providing you with some of their insight in terms of how they pivoted last year to a remote advising kind of a format and what their plans are this year to ensure students are receiving the services that they need in order to make the big jump from secondary education to post-secondary education. So we have with us 3 experts, college access experts from across the state. Each of these 3 individuals manage college access programs that over the course of the last year have had to pivot to providing virtual advising services in some way, shape, or form. And so the goal of this section of the presentation is to identify some best practices, lessons learned, challenges that I think many schools across the state will be experiencing in the coming year. And so I want to first start by introducing each of these 3 individuals, letting you learn a little bit about their program. So Susan, I'll start with you. Do you mind introducing yourself and talk a little bit about the AIRS Foundation?
Thanks, Troy. Susan Rhodes, Director of the AIRS Foundation Scholars Program. And the AIRS Foundation is a college access program that currently serves 8 different high schools in Tennessee across East, Middle, and West Tennessee. We start working with our students in 8th grade and follow them all the way through post-secondary completion. We're also a Tennessee Promise partnering organization. We have full-time college access counselors in each high school that we serve, working 12 months out of the year to help our students remove barriers in the post-secondary process. And so hopefully they can complete college and enter the workforce successfully.
Great, thank you so much. Sharika, do you mind telling us a little bit about the Advise Tennessee program?
Hi, Troy. I'm Sharika Nelms, and I'm the Director of Advise Tennessee. Advise Tennessee is a program of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, and we are a college access advising and capacity building program serving about 14,000 students across 33 high schools throughout the state. Our advisors are also full-time 12-month employees that are embedded in their school systems, working with primarily juniors and seniors on those transactional processes that lead to college enrollment. I think some of our most important work actually happens in the summer when all of our advisors are still working on what we call summer melt, helping students to complete the enrollment process to their post-secondary institution.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Dwayne, do you mind sharing a little bit about the Gear Up Tennessee program?
Sure. Thank you, Troy. My name is Dwayne Gregg. I'm the director of Gear Up Tennessee. Gear Up Tennessee, it's a federally funded program from the U.S. Department of Education that's managed by the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. Gear Up serves a cohort of students that starts in the 7th grade, and then each year we serve seniors. The goal of Gear Up Tennessee is to increase the number of students that graduate from high school and then matriculate on to college and graduate. Last year, we were running 2 Gear Up programs, so we were serving about 8,000 seniors from over 30 high schools across the state. This year, we have 17 high schools across the state and about 4,000 seniors that we're serving.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our focus today is to, well, these are all college access programs that do operate in partnership with school districts. We want to discuss some of the things that you have learned and that you've seen implemented within your programs that any school counselor could adapt and implement within their context, particularly understanding, as we've previously discussed, that even in schools where the vast majority of seniors are going to school in a hybrid or everyday kind of a format, there is a population in most school districts of students who are going to be virtual, at least for a portion, if not the entirety of this semester, if not the year. So the first question, just to kind of dive into some of the questions that I wanted to cover, was when schools closed in March. When I remember distinctly kind of the world that was like the news alerts came in fast and furious mid-March when things just started to change because of the pandemic, and I think awareness of kind of the severity of what we were dealing with happened when schools started to close. How did your college access programs pivot? What went well? What didn't go as well? What were some of the initial kind of things that you learned as that transition happened in mid-March? Sharika, do you mind kicking us off on that?
Sure. Um, I remember that time well as well. It was shocking, and I think our advisors were kind of shell shocked with what was happening as well. But one of the first things that we did, we were fortunate enough to have our program uses a robust text messaging system called Signalvine, and it was a lifesaver during that time. And so we had contact information for the students that we served, cell phone numbers, and so we were able to utilize that system to let students know that, hey, this is how we're going to be contacting you. This is it, we're still available to help you through those processes. And so we'll start calling you as well. So we were able to maintain communication, and students also had a way to contact our advisors. And I think the hardest part about that was really developing kind of expectations to how this would work. Students didn't quite know what to expect from their schools, from whatever senior processes were in process, and the advisors weren't quite sure about how to engage, colleges and universities at the time, because everybody was experiencing the same thing at the same time. So what went well, I think, for us was being able to quickly having contact information for students and being able to quickly engage our students in a manner that they were used to, and then being able to contact us. Um, then getting a hold of students and setting some expectations and reframing our program around interactions that were virtual, using a virtual platform, getting students online, getting students on Zoom, kind of engaging colleges and universities and connecting students with those folks took a little bit more time. And so that was one of the challenges that we initially had.
So in that same vein, for school districts or schools that do not have a tool like Signalvine, something like Remind or
Yes.
any other kind of tools that you deploy, just some way to, particularly on a student's phone, being able to ping them and trying to draw them in. And I think what you said about expectations is really important. We saw a big difference in a lot of our programs where if the school had not set expectations around what the engagement with the school was going to look like, we did not get the kind of return on our outreach like we did. And so setting that expectation is like, here, I'm going to be reaching out to you. This is what we're going to be talking about, and I need you to kind of engage with me, I think is a key point. Susan, what did it look like for you all during that time?
I'll agree with so much with what Sharika said. I mean, our first 2 weeks, we were shell shocked and really expected. For most of our schools, they closed down over spring break. And so I think we were optimistic and thought, we'll see our students again this semester, they'll be back. And so we kind of held on to the traditional things that we had done, which we had a robust messaging system. We have a robust email system for our students, and we continue to use those platforms. And then our students, they were in spring break mode. So they were not returning phone calls, emails, messages because they were on spring break. And so for the first 2 weeks, I just reassured my team that, once spring break is over, if we do not return to school, our students will then start to reach back out to us. They're going to be out of spring break mode and they're going to think, okay, I still have to prepare for post-secondary. I still have to have everything in line to start post-secondary. And so that's exactly what happened. And so at that time, my team really pulled together to say, what are the things we need now? We could not access our school buildings. And our entire program is based on one-on-one meetings. I mean, we meet with each student individually. We had, I think, taken for granted our availability to students. And so how did we become available to students in the time where we couldn't access our schools and our students couldn't access the school either? So we invested in a program or an online scheduler called Schedule Once. And so our students, we started pushing out on our social media, through emails and through text messages. Here's how you can schedule a meeting with your advisor or your counselor. And so students started doing that. We started having numerous Google Meets. We use a Google platform, so we had numerous Google Meets. There were some bumps in the road with students having the technology to do that, so we continued phone calls with those students. We live in very rural areas that our students don't always have access to computer or internet, and so that was a hurdle we had to overcome. But I would say by midsummer, our students really started adjusting to the virtual platform and Google Meet, and that's something that will continue beyond COVID, even being back in our offices. Our students, once in post-secondary, absolutely loved being able to be at UT Knoxville and have a face-to-face meeting with their advisor or counselor.
That's great. So the scheduler that you use, what was the name of that again?
Schedule Once.
And did the students warm to that? I mean, did they utilize that tool?
And just like adults, I know that we hardly schedule anything by picking up a phone and calling anybody anymore. We have their online app or website that we go and we book our dental appointments and eye doctor's appointments. All of our visits feel that way, and I think that our students were accustomed to that from even getting a restaurant reservation. But it's very similar to that. See an advisor or counselor schedule and say, I'll take this time.
That's great. Dwayne, anything to add? Things that you saw in the Gear Up program?
Sure. One thing I think about how the timing being late spring really worked to our advantage in college access. So because in the fall, almost all of our students already completed their Tennessee Promise applications. Most of them have already completed college applications. Probably over 70% had completed their FAFSA. And by that point, we had also, as Sharika mentioned, we also use Signalvine. And so almost all of our seniors were on the texting platform. Actually, last year, I think I mentioned that we had about 8,000 seniors that we were serving. And throughout last school year, we sent over 260,000 text messages to those 8,000 students. It just kind of became the way that we reach out to them and that they could reach out to us with two-way communication. Also being late spring, we hadn't completed this process, but we had started on probably 2/3 of the way through doing senior surveys. So by this point, by the time it hit, we knew where most of our seniors were already planning to go to college at that point, and if any of them were expecting any sort of hiccups or anything like that. So what we were really working on at this point with these students were there were a lot of FAFSA verification types of issues. They were working on orientations with their colleges, and those were things that for the most part, we were able to set up with admissions counselors through Zoom. So instead of admissions counselors coming to the school, we were setting up admissions office Zoom just with those students that were planning to go to those particular institutions and that sort of thing. So that we already really knew what that next step needed to be. So then, as she mentioned, through Zoom, through phone calls, through texting, we were able to contact those students and walk them through what those next steps would be for them, particularly individually, doing that in the spring, and then also, as they mentioned, summer melt during the summer as well. The challenge was those students who wait off until that last minute, who wait for those last couple of months to decide I am going to college or where I'm going, that you didn't have that personal connection with them like we had been with so many other students throughout the year.
Great. Thank you all for that information. So let's pivot to this year. It's going to be an unusual year. It's already begun to be an unusual year. I've best described it as in our statewide programs a little bit of whack-a-mole. We've been following schools. Some have pushed, some are online, some are hybrid. Everyone is in different kind of of a state of being. And so, as you think about advising students this year, college and advising, career advising, but college advising specifically, what is the biggest challenge that you foresee, and how are you going to be addressing that challenge? Susan, let's start with you, if you don't mind.
There's a few things that are top of mind for us right now. One, we used to take a lot of college campus visits, and so we're not traveling right now. We're working on doing some virtual college campus visits, but we're concerned about students not being able to be on campus, feel if that is they're going to be their home away from home for the next 2 to 4 years. To be able to go to a TCAT and see the programs and watch reactions from students, that one-on-one connection, I think we're concerned about missing. And so I think we're going to do virtual campus visits for this semester, and cross our fingers that there's a vaccine or a miracle and we could do college campus visits in the spring, because I think that's really important for our students to be on campus and talk to other students and see what it would feel like a day on a college campus. So many of our students haven't been on a college campus before, and so that's something that's very important. The other piece that we're concerned about, not only just the fully remote students, but also the students that are in the hybrid model, is building rapport with students. We see students, we visit with them in the lunchroom, we visit with them in the halls on break, and so that can't happen this year. And so how do you establish the deep rapport with the students so that you see them every day, you talk to them, you know how their classes are going? And so it's going to really limit our communication with students. And I think we're concerned about the level of rapport that we build and how that transition to having those tough conversations in the spring about if a school is the best fit for you, if you're going to be financially a smart decision for you and your family. And so having those conversations, I think, takes a certain level of rapport. And I think that our counselors are really concerned about establishing that remotely.
Susan, let's key on that one just a little bit, because I think that kind of issue of rapport of students who you're not seeing every day is going to be something that will resonate with a lot of college access and school counseling folk across the state. How are you thinking about addressing that? Like, what are the ways that you're kind of like brainstorming how you might build that rapport when you can't physically be with a student?
I think we'll have to continue really trying to connect with students through social media and more text messages, more emails, things that we hadn't previously relied on. We're also trying to do, we're using Google Classroom as well. And so our counselors are sending out videos record videos and sending those out on Google Classroom around topics that we hope will establish trust. And I hope as the year progresses that we can see our students more and kind of make up for some lost time. But right now, those are the big things that we're going to be trying to do: increase our communications and also just the face-to-face time, whether it be Google Meet or sending out videos via Google Classroom.
Anyone else who wants to kind of key in on that one? Because I think that rapport piece is a really interesting kind of challenge and unique to this time. What are ways that you guys are thinking about that in your programs?
So it definitely is. So part of those students that necessarily they don't see themselves as college going are students that typically in a normal year, we would build that relationship with them and do different activities. And as you mentioned, taking them to campus visit, and hopefully at some point they see themselves being on a college campus and being a college student. That's so much difficult this year. One of the things that we hope to do a lot this year is do a lot more parent engagement and use parents in that way. The other thing that we hope that we are able to do, especially we're talking about with these virtual students, is that our college access professional, our Gear Up site coordinators, want to embed themselves into the classrooms that students are going to be in on a regular basis, that they will take 15 minutes or 20 minutes of this economics class or government class or finance class or something like that and talk about college, talk about the FAFSA, talk about completing the Tennessee Promise. And over time, hopefully that them being able to talk to an entire class leads to a one-on-one Zoom meeting or a one-on-one phone call or something like that.
So that is to say that as the school's implementing their synchronous kind of like Zoom lessons, kind of working with teachers to get a portion of that time to kind of talk about these things and then create structures for a follow-up where then you can do the more in-depth advising. That makes a lot of sense. Sharika, one thing that, I know that you and I have talked about, can you talk a little bit about what you guys have done or are doing with your intro videos? I think is like an interesting thing, and also anything else that you are thinking about in this space.
Well, to echo what Susan and Dwayne have said, the whole concept or crux of college access advising is built on the ability to build relationships with students and with their families, and so much of that is through kind of maybe the nonverbal communication when you're sitting with the student, or when you're able to see them in the hallways, or when you get to know mom and dad in the community that they're a part of. Then you get to learn some of the barriers that are even unspoken, and so it is difficult to think about how to address that when you're not able to sit with the student or see their faces when they're telling you information. And so our advisors are thinking about ways, how can we continue to build, the part of that relationship that is kind of inspirational. And so one of the things that we did, we sent out intro videos, and it's just an opportunity, especially for the students. And the way that this all hit, most advisors are getting a new class at the beginning of the year, and so they haven't had a chance to personally meet with these students before. So it's building a relationship for the first time that kind of compounds that. So our advisors developed videos where the students could see their face and that they could hear their voice. And hey, this is how you contact me, and I'm going to send you these text messages over the course of the year, and this is how we will communicate. And so we have deployed those videos out to students where we have contact information. We sent links of the videos through our text messaging system, but we're also emailing them to parents. And we've been able to collect parent emails and parent phone numbers. And so I think either Susan or Dwayne said parent engagement was critical. And I think that even more so this year, our ability to connect and relate and get information to parents is going to be important. But also thinking, during our text messages, we send out a lot of nudge information about processes and transactions that need to happen. And I think that our advisors are also thinking about, hey, can I send out inspirational text messages too? Hang in there, it's the end of the week, or hey, it's Spirit Week at your school, or hey, let's have a coffee break or a hangout time, on Google or on WebEx or Zoom, and we're just going to chat a little bit. And we've seen students start to acclimate to those kinds of things, and that builds relationship, but also gives us an end to kind of introduce information that can be covered more in depth through an individual counseling call. So those are just some of the ways that we're thinking about kind of changing our communication structure. But we're also we also have been working with our schools to become a part of whatever virtual platform schools are using. So if it's Google, getting items on Google Classroom. Some of our schools have given us space and time to meet with students as a part of their virtual day. So we're doing those things as well to try to help build that relationship and set expectations and provide services to students in different ways.
Hmm. Great, thanks. What other challenges, that you're kind of anticipating this year? And Susan, I interrupted you, but Susan, Sharika, or Dwayne, what are some of the additional challenges that you're perceiving for this year? And what are some of the solutions that you're thinking about to address those challenges?
I think the number one challenge for us, and I've heard this from other folks too, is I didn't realize that that everybody didn't always collect contact information for students. And so sometimes, the schools have information and it may not be accurate because students change cell phone numbers often. And so, getting, especially for schools who are all virtual, that has been one of the challenges that we've seen. What's a way that, we can't text students if we don't have cell phone numbers, and that's the way we've been texting out our surveys and collecting information for students. But how can we get that contact information, and how can we make sure that information remains valid throughout the year? So still working with our schools to get information however we can on students, so that we have a means to contact them
Hmm.
if they're virtual or in person.
That's great. That's a great point. I mean, I think that, we've heard through, where there are students who are MIA, it's difficult to engage those students if you don't know how to reach them. And so I know in our programs, and Susan, you and I have talked about this as well, we're spending a lot of time here at the beginning of school year making sure that our contact information is up to date, because what we find is what's reported on registration paperwork is not always up to date, and does change on the regular. Dwayne, anything else that you're thinking about in terms of additional challenges?
In addition, thinking about access to students, so part of it is collecting that contact information to put into Signal Line for texting right now. The other part is that we know that we have some students in some of our rural areas that they're considered virtual students, or they're considered hybrid, but they lack the technology or the broadband access to really be able to use the virtual platform that the school has, which also means that our site coordinators cannot embed themselves into a classroom and talk to those students in that way either. Right now, we don't even have their phone numbers for calling them or texting them. Then that's a challenge, and it's just going to be much more difficult, at least in the very beginning of this year, to be able to work with those students. I know I have some site coordinators that, for that particular reason, they may not be able to reach them by text or a social media or anything, that they're actually, mailing things home to them and things like that right now.
Great.
It's a small number of students, but that is absolutely the students that we are trying to target right now too, those that are more maybe at risk of not going on to college.
Well, and the mode of operation, as like we've perceived, is that there are packets that are going home. And so I think taking what the content that you're delivering virtually, and is there a way to consolidate that into a one pager, in addition to phone call follow-up that then walks those students with? And, I also think, and this is something we can talk about, and this is actually a good transition point. We have a list of questions. I might skip around a little bit based on the conversation, but I think how we, how we engage students, and like, are there instances where it does make sense if families or if the school policy allows to invite a student to come in to accomplish a particular task in a socially distanced way, so that the family, for whatever reason they have chosen virtual, or if it's the whole school district, does feel comfortable. And I think that's going to only be understood through kind of conversation. So one of the things that I'm concerned about, as we think from a THEC TSAC perspective, and all of us have spoken about this at some point or another, is that in March of this year, when everything fell kind of apart, students had already filled out the Tennessee Promise application. Dwayne, you talked about that. They had filled out the FAFSA college applications. There were students who were already in the pipeline. So from a state perspective, when you fill out a Tennessee Promise application, there's a series of things that organizations like the Ayers Foundation with Susan, or Tennessee Achieves, that communication starts flowing to those students because they're in the pipeline. Same thing at higher ed institutions. Once you fill out that college application, there's communications that then flow from the institution to help walk a student through their next steps. This year, for those virtual students, we have to get them in the pipeline. And so there are some very key milestones that we think about at a state level: FAFSA filing, Tennessee Promise application, college application, that are going to be very important this year. So as you think about those, and I think we can even kind of start thinking, let's talk about Promise to begin with, because I think it'll be a good proxy maybe for college application. FAFSA is a little bit more detailed because there's parental engagement there. But when you think about college and Promise application, how are you approaching this? Do you have any best practices in helping students meet these milestones? How are you going to kind of go through some of this process with students? Dwayne, do you mind kicking off that one?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, again, with your students that are going to be in the school building, it's pretty straightforward. It's going to be pretty simple. It will take maybe a little bit longer because of social distancing, that you can't complete as many in an auditorium or a large classroom as you could before. But again, it's going to be those virtual students that are going to be the challenge. So a couple of different ways we're planning to, whether we're using social media or texting, using some school websites, sending like step-by-step instructions or step-by-step videos of how to complete the Tennessee Promise, and as well as how to complete college applications that could be done during that same period of time during College App Week. And then each of our site coordinators will receive a list of those students that have completed the Tennessee Promise. And I think you're going to talk more about that, Troy, but they'll have a list of those students that completed. So before the deadline, probably about a month before the deadline, they will be able to put together an Excel spreadsheet of those particular students that have not yet completed the Promise, and we'll be able to target those students and then reach out to them, whether it's through Zoom, whether it's through a text, whether it's through a phone call, and then send them or walk them through that situation over the phone step by step if that's what they need to do. Also, most, if not all of our schools will offer the opportunity for those students and or their parents, if they wanted to, times that they could come into the school building just to complete that,
And
even
we'll
though they're
provide
actually a hybrid student.
Right, and we'll provide a more comprehensive list of this, but I will say that one of the things that TSAC in partnership with Tennessee Promise partnering organizations we're going to be putting out in the next couple of weeks is a really quick video that walks a student step by step on how to create their TSAC portal. A quick video on step by step how to do that college application. These are great videos that will be able to be embedded in Google Classroom or Schoology or Thrivus, whatever your school is using, but they also will be able to be texted out. And also, we're going to be providing step-by-step instructions from, it's going to end up being 30 plus institutions who have agreed to create videos outlining their application process. That I think will be another good piece just to empower students with the step-by-step pieces. And I think a lot of this is triage. There are going to be students who are going to do it on their own. There are going to be students who need a little bit of help. And then there are going to be students who need more help. I think doing what we can do on the front end to help those students who can do it on their own allows you to kind of focus in. And we're going to walk through this at the very end of this, some of the tools available. But Dwayne, you hit on one, particularly as it pertains to Promise. And I know all three programs use this. There are reports and e-grants that you can download that give you a list of all of the students at your high school who have filled out a Tennessee Promise application. And it also gives you information about which of those students, those Promise applicants, have completed the FAFSA. And that's a great way to really target your interactions so that you're making sure that you're targeting to the students who have not yet completed the milestones. And so if you need help doing that, you can reach out to your TSAC outreach specialist for that. But Susan and Sharika, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in this kind of milestone space?
I agree with what the points that Dwayne made. With our remote students, we are trying to reach out to those students and see if they do need additional help. We've sent links and short videos, and are looking forward to sending the videos that TDEC and TSAC are working on right now as well to those students. We're using spreadsheets to track which students have completed the milestones and which ones we need to continue to reach out to. In addition, we're offering those students that are fully remote to schedule a Google Meet so that we can share the screens with them and walk them through the application if they need additional assistance. Several of our school systems that are hybrid have 1 day a week that remote students can schedule a time to come into the school system if they're comfortable with that method. And so we have met with several virtual students, completely remote students on those days as well. And we're also offering those students, if they feel comfortable and need the additional assistance, that we can meet with them outdoors at a picnic table, socially distanced, to see what help they do need, if any. So if it needs to be beyond just sharing a screen on Google Meet, that we can offer really, truly whatever the student and the student's family is comfortable with, that advisors and counselors are comfortable with as well. I think this is a time when we all just have to be patient and continue to work towards completing those milestones. It won't look the same as this year. It's not going to be on the same timeline as previous years. And I think that we have to be patient with ourselves as well, because I know all of our advisors and counselors, they feel like they're behind this year. School started later, all of your students are not there, and that's okay. I think allowing all of ourselves just a little bit of leeway to know that we're doing the absolute best that we can in the situation, and that we may not be at 100% Tennessee Promise application by September 15th like we would have been in the past, but we'll get there before November 1st, and that will be okay this year.
Sharika, how about you? Can you anything to add to what has been shared thus far?
I think I'll just echo everything that Dwayne and Susan said. I think for us, kind of the key word is to be proactive. We're kind of all used to, our schools have been used to Tennessee Promise processes where we kind of get them all together and get those applications filled out, and it runs smoothly because we've done it like that for the last few years. But in many cases, we can't do that this year. So I think thinking of other ways to be proactive and to try to go after every every single student and kind of not, not take the approach of wait and see or I'll bump into them, or, just kind of thinking proactively, how can I reach out and grab the student and so that they don't miss this opportunity.
That kind of, I think, is a good transition. The idea of proactively reaching out when we talk about and think about FAFSA filing too as one of these milestones. I think that by practice, a lot of programs, school counseling programs, schools across the state, you hold these kind of cattle call FAFSA filing events where, and it's a little bit of a if you build it, they will come kind of things. And in our experience, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have 50 families, sometimes you have 5. What are your thoughts? And I think, Dwayne, you've seen some of this. I know Sharika and Susan, I'm sure you've seen it in your programs too. This kind of idea of proactively reaching out and scheduling time with families. Is that something that you do? Can you talk a little bit, Dwayne, if you kick us off about how you've implemented that as a practice for FAFSA and the difference you've seen in doing it that way, as opposed to just holding these like large scale events? And I will say, those large scale events have a place too. And for 90% of families, filling out the FAFSA is pretty easy and they can do it at those events. But there's 10% of folks where it gets a little bit, trickier, where there are things that you have to do. So what does that look like for you guys, Dwayne?
It's something that in several of our schools have been very successful over the last couple of years. And you're right, they still have the large events as well that a lot of students will come to with their parents. But what they've done is started to reach out or have a team of people that are reaching out to parents and students at the same time via phone and talking to them and scheduling a specific appointment time for them to come to the school. And that's absolutely what they're going to do this year as well. This year, that way they won't have too many people at one time as well, and they'll be able to work with them one-on-one or one-on-two or something like that in a situation. When they first started that, they weren't sure how it was going to work, but it's kind of worked like if someone had a dental appointment or a doctor appointment or something like that. Probably 90% of the time, the person felt like they had an appointment, that it was their time to be there, and that was their only time. So they tended to show up. Once they made the appointment, the site coordinator followed up with them to remind them. They also would send them information to let them know what they needed to bring to the appointment, so they were prepared to finish their FAFSA when they came, if they would have everything they needed. And then sometimes have a follow-up session after that to kind of talk them through with that, what's next now that I've got this completed, now that I know how much I'm going to be funded and stuff like that. A lot of our school systems, both large and small, so schools that had maybe 100 seniors to schools that had 400 seniors, have used this approach and ended up with 80 to 90% FAFSA completion over the last couple of years this way. And I think this year in particularly, it may even be even more crucial to do it in this way. The thing that may be much different this year is those one-on-one meetings that work through appointments. A lot of those this year are going to be virtual instead of coming to the school to complete, but it'll still be that one-on-one time.
Thank you, Susan. How has this looked for you all? What are your thoughts about how you're going to approach FAFSA this year generally?
We moved away from the group FAFSA filing nights and when it moved to October. We were trying to get parents in for individual meetings with their students in the early fall, and so we kind of merged those two events. So we try to schedule that one-on-one FAFSA filing appointment, the student and the parent there, so we can help them walk through the FAFSA, but we can also have that fall, here's what to expect your senior year, here's what to expect during the summer, and answer those questions individually. And so we have found that has been incredibly helpful in having that one-on-one individual time. It's also, parents are incredibly busy, and the more times we ask them to come hang out with us for a little bit, the harder it gets. And so for us, moving those FAFSA and the parent fall meeting together has been incredibly successful. I do have some concerns because those happen during the school day and afternoon appointments, and so many of our school systems at this time are not allowing visitors or parents to enter the school building. And so I think that's something that's to be determined with us of how we're going to handle meeting with parents. I think it'll have to be more remote, Google Meet, sharing a screen if they need assistance with the FAFSA and have questions about it. So I think we'll have to move more in that direction, depending on the situation at each of our school systems.
Sharika, anything more to add from an Advise Tennessee perspective regarding this topic?
Like Dwayne and Susan, we found that the individual meetings is just a best practice, and I think that that can be said if it's traditional or virtual. We're looking at hosting those meetings virtually this year in most cases because, because of social distancing and having visitors in schools. And so reaching out to parents, trying to get those meetings scheduled. Usually the FAFSA completion process we found goes a lot smoother when you have parents and students there at the same time. Completing those applications. So we will be doing the same. Another thing that we found that really works, we really work with our advisors to try to complete all of their caseload FAFSA applications before the holiday break, so that after the holiday break, we know some students won't get it done, so that we can work on kind of cleaning up those students that are remaining. But we really, really push to have all of those done before the holiday break, and we've seen some success with that.
Two things that I heard specifically there. I mean, I think it's both, accelerating, getting as many of the ones that are relatively easy to do done early, so you can have time to triage the students who might need additional assistance. But then also, I think there's a flavor here where we have to go and proactively pull these students in, and that's what's going to be a little bit different this year. So that might look like asking for flexibility to shift some hours to the evening to kind of do some of this work where you can have access to those families. And for those who don't have the technology capacity, how can you create a space where you can do that in a socially distanced way if need be within the context of the school? All great points. Any other thing you'd like to add about just the milestones generally that you've been thinking about, or things that you're going to be implementing this year? Going once, going twice. Okay, we'll move on to the next piece. We've talked about several technology tools that you're going to be using. Text messaging through Signalvine or other means, schools that use Remind, how can you leverage that? Susan, you talked about kind of keying into Google Classrooms or whatever the learning platform is that a school is using to address college advising, keying into synchronous learning opportunities. We talked about the scheduler. Are there any other tools, technology tools, that you think that schools should be looking at as they kind of approach this year? It's a pretty comprehensive list. Anything else?
Not to name particular programs or anything, Troy, but if school counselor just wanted to look around, we're talking about our students are going to miss a lot of opportunities like campus visits. There are a lot of different kind of online or virtual programs for virtual tutoring, virtual mentoring, virtual campus visits, virtual tours, and things like that. That's definitely worth them exploring, seeing what's out there and what might meet the needs of their students this year.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to be true for in-person folks too. I mean, there are colleges, and it varies. I'm sure you all have seen this too. Some colleges are open for business and want big groups to come. Others are being a little bit more judicious about the size or the quantity of folks who are coming onto their campus. And so it looks a little different everywhere. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that wouldn't necessarily be just those programs that have a cost related to them, but that will be the same with college fairs and career fairs and things like that they need to kind of figure out how to plug into those, that we know some of our virtual students will take advantage of those and some that won't. It'll be very different than a traditional college fair that they've experienced before, but for some students, that will be a great way for them to check out and explore different options.
College fairs, that's an interesting one too. I think a lot of folks are grappling, and this is not to put anybody on the spot. Do y'all hear anything out there? I know that organizations who put those things on are looking at different ways of doing that. How are folks approaching the college fair this year?
So Troy, right now as we're on this call, my team is having a training session on creating a Bitmoji college fair. So, it has been very interesting, and they've reached out to the schools for the content to put into this Bitmoji college fair, and that has been the resources that the colleges and post-secondary institutions have provided has been great. And so I think this is something that our students will really enjoy. And so I'd be happy to share that resource with other college access professionals that would like to try to do the same thing for their school system. I think that, some of the conversation was around, should we have a contactless college fair, and just, a lot of our school systems are not allowing, any outside person in. And so we've landed on trying to do this Bitmoji college fair. And so it's ongoing. They're working on it today, and I'll keep you posted.
Interesting. That's cool. So is it actually through the company Bitmoji that you do this, or is there a particular resource?
I can ask and get back with you.
Okay. Well, here's what we'll do is that we're recording this today, and then there's going to be a piece at the end that I'll record. You give that back to me, and I'll include it onto the last part of the final version of the presentation.
I'm missing the training, so I saw some screenshots, and it looked really, it's really cool. Because it's very interactive and interesting. So I hope students will enjoy it.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we'll include that in the final slides. Anybody else? Any other technology that you can think of? We covered quite a bit in that realm.
Troy,
okay, well, go ahead.
I would hate to miss out, as you talked about technology, and we talked about so many different programs and things that we use, that people would not overlook the importance of a phone call. Sometimes that way to connect with students is going to be 10 times, with some students, is going to be 10 times better than any technology piece that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's a very valid point. And particularly in that space of building rapport, so that then your remind app kind of text lands in a different way, where there's that connection. Right. It's a great point. So are there, and I'm going to kind of amend this one a little bit, are there additional best practices that you can share, or are there kind of like, final thoughts that you would have as it relates to just like, this is, as you approach this year, this very unusual year, what are the best practices or just kind of frameworks that you're thinking about as you kind of think about serving students this year? And Sharika, I'll start with you if you don't mind.
I would just say, I don't know that there's a particular framework that we're thinking beyond what we've discussed, but I would just say, be willing to try everything. And I think that's where we are. We're willing to try everything. Our goal is to communicate with students and families. We don't want any student to miss any opportunity, regardless of what's happening in the world around us. Students still need post-secondary options, and we would want to make sure that we are connecting them with those options. So don't be afraid to try something new. If it doesn't work, everything's not going to work. And that's okay. You just found out what doesn't work. So try something else. It may work. And then try multiple things for the students that you have. And I think we're all kind of throwing everything up against the wall, figuring out what sticks for which students, and we're rolling with that because this is an unusual year. And we'll come out of this, I think, with some best practices. We'll come out of this with some change thinking about the way that we approach college access and about what's important and when it's important. And those are good things for us to hear. But I think we are open to anything as far as accomplishing the goal of connecting students with opportunities.
Yeah, excellent. Susan?
I absolutely agree with Sharika. I think that there will be some changes in college access that will move all of our missions forward. I will say that I feel like I'm more connected to the college access community. I think we all, I've had more conversations with Troy and Chrissy from Tennessee Chiefs and other college access professionals across the state to brainstorm ideas on how we better serve students during this time. And so I think that camaraderie among college access organizations is higher than it was before COVID. And so I don't want to take that for granted and want to continue the momentum forward of making sure all of us are connected to each other and supporting each other. I definitely have felt supported by the community during this time. That for students, I think a couple of things that our counselors and advisors would say have been game changers for them. We installed lock boxes outside of each of our offices outdoors, so that if students needed to turn in any signed paperwork or anything that was confidential that they couldn't enter the building or didn't feel comfortable entering the building, that we gave them space to turn in any paperwork that they needed for us to have. So that's been great. It's been a great way for our students to submit without having contact with another person. The other thing is we asked each of our students and parents what their preferred method of communication was. So shockingly enough, not all students want to receive a million text messages. So we have those requests, and it's worked really well. I think that the communication that we receive back when we contact students and the method that they prefer has been very helpful, and it also has helped us build that rapport. So we ask them, and then we listen, and so that helps us build rapport with students as well. So I think those are the big things. I know it's going to be a challenging year, and just continuing to support each other and give everybody a break, I think, is really important.
Thank you. Dwayne, anything to add?
The first thing that I thought of, they both really talked about a lot, is that it's not going to be kind of a one size fits all. What is going to work with this school or this student, it's not going to be the same thing for other schools and other students. It's going to be a combination of all of these different means of communications and means of working with our students and our parents this year that is going to lead to our highest level of success. The other thing that I think about is this is going to be a year that having students slip through the cracks is going to be so easy. In the past, when we would have 99% of our students that would be in a classroom every day, you can go to those students, as you mentioned, and pull them out and make sure they're completing their Tennessee Promise or college application, or they're still building that relationship, but they're still trying to think about, am I going to go to a TCAT or a community college, or what I might do. This year, I think creating kind of that spreadsheet, that list of all of those students and all the milestones and who's done what and who has not, and then going back to that spreadsheet ever so often and seeing those students that they haven't been showing up to any of the events, they haven't been showing up to any of the virtual meetings, they haven't answered the text, they haven't answered any of your phone calls. Those are going to be the students this year, if we aren't really careful and proactive in meeting with them or their parents in some way, that come June or July or August of next year, they're going to say, I wish I would have done this. And they've missed that opportunity to go to school and have a lot of the financial aid opportunities that they would if they don't, Tennessee Promise and FAFSA and things now.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank all three of you for taking some time to share your experience and best practices. And you've all touched on it here at this last piece, that this is an unusual year. And I think that if there's any year where we all are being forced to, and really there's a necessity for us to think about doing our work differently, this is that year. And so I hope that everyone who is listening has been able to find some of these things helpful. And here in just a minute, I'm going to walk through and catalog some of the resources that we've talked about and provide links to those things. But thanks to all three of you for spending a little bit of time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I hope that you found the time with Dwayne, Sharika, and Susan to be helpful and informative. These are three pros at what they do in terms of doing college advising work, and they are working hard to successfully migrate their work to a virtual environment. I did want to go over some of the resources that were discussed during the session that you just listened to. The first few of them on the screen in front of you, Signalvine, Remind, these are all communication platforms that you can text, send messages to students via an app. There is a charge, per student charge for Signalvine. There's not a per text message charge, it's just a per student charge, and that works on a sliding scale depending on the size of your school. Remind does have free options along with some paid options. The next three resources, Calendly, Appointlit, Schedule Once, these are all scheduling apps similar to the one that Susan mentioned that they use at the Ayers Foundation. Some of these, again, are free. Some of them, there are some pay structures. They integrate with different learning management platforms, or different, if your school district is using Teams or Zoom. So there's a couple of different ways you can utilize these. Susan also mentioned that her staff was creating a college fair using Bitmoji classrooms. What they are doing is using a Google Classroom platform. They are then creating Bitmoji classrooms for each of the colleges. So you could do a quick Google on how to create a Bitmoji classroom, and there's several resources there on how to do that step by step. One resource that we did not talk about specifically, but that I would want to mention, is Canva. Canva is an online tool that really quickly lets you create flyers, social media templates, GIF type things, all things that are really off the shelf. It's a free service. You can do some additional pay structures if you want extra kind of bells and whistles, but the free one really is all that you need. So this is a great way if you want to send out a reminder to students in a very visually informative way of, like, the Tennessee Promise deadline is upcoming. Canva is a great tool for that. The next two are two resources that are being created or have been published by the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. The first is the Senior Next Guide. This is a step-by-step guide that walks seniors through everything that they should be doing as it relates to going to a TCAP, a two-year college, a four-year college, or into the workplace during their senior year. It is a book. We print this book for our Gear Up and Advice Tennessee programs, but for the entire state, we make an online version of it available. It is a fillable PDF. It would be easy thing to kind of pull apart individual pages to do with students if you have them in person. You could also load the entire notebook, kind of workbook, into a learning management system and have students do it that way throughout the course of the year. And we have one for seniors, and we also just created one for sophomores. And so there is no cost for that resource. Finally, the Senior Milestone Toolkit, we are working with the partnering organizations for the Tennessee Promise, Tennessee Achieves, the AIRS Foundation, TSAC, and THEC to pull together a series of videos that you can text out to students, you can send to students. We will have videos, one-pagers, focused on the three key milestones of the senior year: Tennessee Promise application, college application, and FAFSA filing. So for Tennessee Promise, we'll have a video on how do you create your TSAC student portal, how do you fill out the college application, and it'll walk the students through that step by step. The videos are about 4 to 5 minutes long. In addition to, we've asked institutions across the state to create step-by-step videos on how to fill out their college's application. We will have 35, 36 videos focused on that. We will cover all the TCATs, all the community colleges, and the majority of the public four-year institutions, and many of the private four-year institutions are participating as well. These are, again, are videos that you'll be able to send out to students that will walk them through step-by-step filling out those college applications. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us. We've listed the contact for Susan Rhodes, Dwayne Gregg, Sharika Nelms, and myself, Troy Grant. If you have any questions or you'd like to get a little bit more information about anything that we talked about, do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're all in uncharted territory, and we are going to be stronger if we partner together and share those best practices and share the ideas that we're all developing. So thank you so much for your time, and good luck this year.